All right, guys, continuing our talk on the Cold War in Asia, we're going to take a look now at Vietnam, which is a former French colony up until 1954 when Ho Chi Minh uh, and others led a independence movement, and they finally gained their independence in 1954 from France, that is. So they were a former colony. They gained their independence in 1954, but they split into a North and South Vietnam. The North, as you might guess, is going to be communist. The South is going to be democratic and capitalist. And so we're going to see how the U.S. gets involved here. All right. In 1954, after they gained their independence and split, soon afterwards, Ho Chi Minh was not satisfied, and he wanted a united Vietnam. And so he began a civil war to take over South Vietnam and form a Vietnam that was entirely communist. And so he was supported in South Vietnam by rebels, communist rebels, who also wanted to be a communist country like the North was. This rebel group was known as the Viet Cong, and the Viet Cong in North Vietnam were also supported through weapons and supplies and information by China, especially in the Soviet Union. They wanted more communist countries like themselves. They wanted to spread it, and so they supported them, and this became another proxy war. The South, as you might imagine, is going to be supported by France, of course, the United States and Britain, the other first world countries. And what they ended up doing was send in troops to make sure that the South Vietnamese government, the democratic government, could stay in place, and they could fend off any threats from the Viet Cong to take them over. So from 1960 to 1968, it got more and more dangerous. So the United States had to send more and more troops, and this is kind of what it looked like there. So we see U.S. troops slowly growing until 1968, when the war hits its peak for U.S. troop involvement and becomes a full-fledged war. But the U.S. goal, again, is to contain communism and make sure it doesn't spread any farther. And so they sent in troops to make sure the North stayed communist and the South stayed capitalist. But they're not trying to necessarily invade the North just yet. All right, so we're going to support, the United States is going to support democracy in South Vietnam, try to take out that Viet Cong rebel force. But the problem with the Viet Cong is that they use guerrilla-style war tactics. Vietnam, if you've seen it before, is highly vegetated, meaning that it has a large tree area where it is very tough to see civilians. There are jungles there that they can hide in very easily, and it made fighting them very difficult. One thing they tried to use to take out some of those jungles was in a chemical agent called Agent Orange. This killed any type of vegetation at all to try to take out some of those areas. We can see them better. Another way they did it was, you've probably heard of napalm. It's this jelly-like fiery substance that burns at a very high temperature and takes out foliage as well. These were very devastating and caused a lot of other civilian deaths and pretty tragic injuries as well. And Agent Orange is a poisoning agent that got into the water too, and it caused a lot of issues. A lot of backlash came from that as well, seen as inhumane to the people of Vietnam. This also was seen as an unnecessary war back home. They had a draft in place to force male citizens to join the army and fight in Vietnam. Many of them refused or dodged the service. And in general, there was a lot of protests saying that the Vietnam War was something that we should not be in. They already saw the problems with North Korea and the Korean conflict, and the U.S., according to many U.S. citizens, did not need to be there. Here's a couple images from those protests. They were very outspoken against the U.S.'s involvement. Nonetheless, we had troops there, and we tried our best to fight off the Viet Cong. And for the most part, they were able to drive them out of South Vietnam, but they could not defeat Ho Chi Minh in the north. So North Vietnam remained communist, while the Viet Cong were at least driven back to the border. Eventually, the war became unpopular, and the U.S. withdrew. Richard Nixon withdrew troops and sent them back home to the United States and gave control back to South Vietnam. So it basically ended up being a stalemate, and it was separated still in North and South, just as it was before. And so the U.S. thought they'd achieved their goals. However, as soon as the U.S. left, North Vietnam and the communists there overran the South and unified them as one communist nation. And so Vietnam is completely communist at this point, and the U.S. fails in its goal. Here's a timeline of events. Overall, the Vietnam War was successful up until when they left, and then all of their goals were erased after they left, and North Vietnam invaded South Vietnam and took them over. So now we see here communism is still spreading around the world. We had the Soviet Union and their Iron Curtain. We have China, of course, is as well. North Korea is now communist. All of Vietnam and their bordering countries, Laos and Cambodia, are communist, and it's still spreading even farther. We've talked about Cuba, and it's moving around the world. So the U.S. is afraid of this domino theory, but we're going to see some other events are going to take place that wipes out a lot of communist countries here soon.